Okay, so this video is to explain the difference between ilustrisimo Cali and doce Paris, or ilustrisimo Cali and doce Paris. I used to train doce Paris for a long time. I switched to ilustrisimo, and the main key difference is that one acknowledges the stick as a blade, and one has more of a sport aspect. So it acknowledges the stick as a stick. So ilustrisimo likes to acknowledge it more as a blade. So all movements with the stick have to be treated the same way you would treat a sword. Doce Paris allows a lot of whipping strikes and fanning strikes, which you cannot do, right, with a sword. It's impossible. And they'll hit with both sides of the stick, whereas ilustrisimo will always hit with the bladed portion. This is really noticeable when actually training with a blade, because if I were to train with this doce Paris style, I'd be here doing all types of stuff like this, and there's no power behind it, and it actually becomes very hard on the wrist, and it simply doesn't work because a lot of the time I'd just be hitting with this. With a stick in competition, it's great because I can get so many points by just whipping the guy and doing movements like that that you just can't do with a sword. The other thing about doce Paris is it's an enclosed fighting system. They'll leave a butt, they'll use it enclosed to hit, and they'll also use it for trapping. Ilustrisimo likes to favor range, so they'll actually leave just a touch of a butt and favor going for further away strikes. It's a long-range fighting system. It does have middle and close range, but it favors being out far and attacking the hand. When you have a stick, it makes sense, or a sword. You want to attack the closest weapon to you, which is the guy's hand. Those are some key differences. If you look at just range alone, here versus here makes a huge difference. When I'm in close, this might work a little better, but if the fight is starting from out here and the guy's far away from me, he's done if I get that extra range. So once again, key differences is here I'll use a lot of more power strikes, cutting, always using the blade as my weapon, even with a stick, and a lot more thrusting techniques. Thrusts also turn into cuts. Whereas doce Paris is a lot of whipping strikes, a lot of in-close tight strikes, and a lot more of a butt. Okay? I'm going to explain how this affects what I do with the knife. So when I switched from doce Paris, in doce Paris I used to love holding the blade like this, and being really close, and cutting very fast, and using it also for trapping the arm. So I would use this part if the guy came in with his knife, I'd wrap his arm and then cut, or come across and cut. Now, ever since and I would use this as the butt, so I'd hit people with it, or I'd hit people with it. And if they came in to thrust or whatever, I'd just try to stab their hand and then cut across. When I switched to ilustrisimo Cali, I learned that the extra range, once again, makes a huge difference. So if I'm out here, this is my range, same as a punch, right? So this is my range with this, maybe out to here. With ilustrisimo, holding it like I'm in a box, right, and just thrust really fast, and that's very fast. You can cut really fast, you can stab really fast. So here, there's almost no way to defend it. Okay? So, this method of fighting gives me that extra bit of range and allows me to attack their hand while someone might still be holding it like this. So if they're out there holding it like this, I'm just cutting their hand. I get about 7 to 8 more inches, depending on the size of the blade, even more. Also in close, I have a lot more strikes. Holding the blade like this, theoretically if it's a one-sided blade, I keep it sharp on the outside. I can cut here, I can cut here, I can cut up, I can cut up, I can stab, down. But short of that, that's about all I can do. I'm not saying it's not important to know how to fight like this and this is not effective, but when it's like this, I can cut at virtually any angle And my thrusting is once again way more effective. And my thrusting, just like the stick, into cutting becomes very effective. So I can thrust here, here, here. I can cut straight down here. I can cut in here. So my movements can be much more dynamic. And this hand can become way more active. Just like with a stick. And I can also suddenly pop in and come back out. So you see it, once again, with the way I train with this, if I'm constantly training whipping strikes here, right, it'll drastically affect the way I use the knife. Whereas if I'm constantly training cutting strikes, none of this, there is abanicos, but they're different. I cut with the blade, and then I turn my hip and I cut back. So it's the same thing as this, except with my hips so that I can get the blade portion cutting, right? So that whenever I transition to a knife or a sword, see, it's the same, I'm still getting my cuts. And I also develop a lot more hip strength because every hit is using my hip. You also get much more range and much more power. So that was a big change for me when switching, and that's the most noticeable. And that's something I've noticed also applies to empty hand. Right? So you get a very fast jab when that's how you train. When you train just a lot of snapping movements and a lot of long-range power movements, you get power in your punches because you're constantly used to using your hips. Right? So it's the same thing here as it would be here. Even if I'm just sparring, it's the exact same thing. I'm using my hip to throw it. Same thing I would do with the knife if I was stabbing is the same thing I'm doing when I'm throwing a punch.